I do want to go back to you had mentioned how it's not just about power and speed, but efficiency. So I think most people can agree that swimming, there is a right way to swim. Like technique is so focused on in the swim.
Hmm.
Um, I don't find it as controversial nowadays, but do you think there is a proper way to run?
um, Man, I think that this topic has been really, really blown up. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's gotten. Is there an absolute perfect way to run? Probably not. And I think that's been proven because there's been really high level runners who aren't doing things quote unquote perfect. You know,
Right.
you would look at some runners and the absolute best example is the women's marathon world record holder Paula Radcliffe.
Hmm.
I mean, her form is not anything close to what they put in the books. You know, it's not
Hmm.
anywhere close. Um, and I think sometimes, what is it? The mind is the biggest obstacle to efficient movement. You get
Right.
out there and start thinking about everything. I guarantee you, Paula Radcliffe's not out there thinking about everything when she's setting a marathon world record. Now, some athletes are. I mean, some runners and most high level runners do kind of check the boxes on their foot strike, their cadence, how they swing their arms. They are checking all the boxes on there. Uh,
Hmm.
but a lot of them are not. And then we have the topic of, is there an injury risk for making major modifications?
Right.
I think the one thing I would look at with any runner is, and it's kind of a two-part thing, is cadence. I think is very important. There isn't any high level runners with slow cadences,
Hmm.
whether it's a marathon runner or the 100-meter sprint. There's no such thing as any of them running a slow cadence. So I do think there is a lot to be said for cadence and training cadence. And also, I think it's well proven that training your cadence is not an injury risk. Learning to set the feet back down a little bit sooner is it's just not an injury risk at all. Now, there's an adjustment period, and I think there's a right way to do it.
Hmm.
Um, but some of the things, for example, like heel striking has a horrible reputation. But the
Right.
truth is, Bobby McGee, who's one of the most famous running coaches in the world, will tell you that
Hmm.
there's absolutely nothing wrong with the heel strike as long as your cadence is good. Because what happens is when the cadence is good, your foot is falling underneath the center of gravity. So
Right.
if you're running with a 70 cadence and landing out front, you're probably jarring. The brakes are on while you run, and you have that
Hmm.
injury risk.
Hmm.
But if you're striking with the heel first at a almost 90 cadence, that foot now is striking underneath the body. There's not as much braking mechanism, and there is not an injury risk. So when I work with someone and talk about running technique, I pretty much focus on the cadence aspect is my big thing. If the arms are crossing the body, yeah, we're going to fix that. If the head's bopping up and down a lot, we're going to talk about that. If they look like they're sitting in a chair, we're going to talk about the mobility of their hips a lot when they run. Um, but I have definitely found that by training the cadence properly, it allows everything else to kind of fall into place, sort of.
Hmm.
And also, the body's ability to be strong and mobile is very important to having an efficient running form as well. So it gets into our hips. Are we strong where we need to be? Are we flexible where we need to be? What's our mobility like? And if those things are really good, you have a much better chance of having a really efficient running gait.
So I always think about here's another. It's this phrase in my head. And I don't know where it came from. Is flexibility is strength.
Yeah,
Like increasing your flexibility increases your push off power, increases how fast you're going to be able to go because everything is more mobile.
absolutely. Mobility is everything. Um, yeah, and for injuries as well. If the hips are locked up and tight, I mean, you can't get into a good running cadence. It's just not going to allow it at all. That's why I mean, my athletes, I advise them to doing mobility type work, even if it's just a few minutes, with every run that they do. Just working on that aspect. Another thing I would say is a lot of times people who struggle with running cadence is they're only doing easy paced running.
Hmm.
They're never, doing things like strides, which I know, doing strides and doing interval type training is going to help bring cadence up as well. Because if you're constantly running slow every single workout, it's going to bring cadence down. You're not going to have as natural as high a cadence. It's the same thing with cycling. You get a lot of people come in and they're mashers. I'll read a data file on a ride or a workout, and average cadence 78. Well, it's like that's such a slow cadence.
Hmm.
It's the same thing. So you do like things like fast pedal drills and stuff like that. You learn to turn the feet over more rapidly, even if that means selecting easier gears. You're a more efficient cyclist. So it's the same thing in run. It's the same thing in running.
Yeah, I feel like when I started triathlon, I definitely mashed the gears more when I was racing. But as I was racing, I was like looking at the guys that were passing me and then watching, like trying to figure out what they were doing. How are they shifting? How are they
Yeah,
pedaling? And it was like this slow learning curve, because at that time, I think I'm trying to remember how many years I raced before we started working together. Yeah, I mean, Barb was right in the swim workouts, but I think I had at least 4, maybe 5 years without anybody like really looking at like, what am I doing on the bike and that kind of stuff.
yeah,
So I think that mashing comes from like it feels like you're doing more work.
it does. It absolutely it does. I mean, because it's like those cadences are like hill climbing cadences for a lot of
Hmm.
people. It makes you feel like you're pushing and doing work. But what's actually happening at the end of the day is you're destroying your legs for running, because
Right.
our heart and lungs have a much higher potential, and are much more they're unlimited, to where our muscles are our weakness. So with a lot of triathletes, it's the body that's more of the limiter than the heart and the lungs.
Hmm.
So when we select an easier gear on the bike and turn a higher cadence, we're saving our legs for running. We're asking more out of our cardiovascular system and less out of our muscular system. So it spares the legs for running. But our heart and lungs, as training triathletes, are so advanced, um, that it doesn't dig into our resources like climbing up a hill for 56 miles would do
Right.
on the bike, which is essentially what a lot of people will do at those really low cadences.
Hmm.
And again, the best way I've seen it improve is, number one, is by doing more cycling. I mean,
Hmm.
that's a large part of it, because again, a lot of people come to triathlon with very little cycling experience, and then the drills, like on the trainer doing like the fast pedal drills and single leg, and I have athletes do long spins around 100 cadence, 5-10 minutes, fast pedal drills 115 or so on the cadence. Learn to really turn the feet over.
One thing I want to talk about before we run out of time is I want to talk a little bit about Shawn and how you kind of like got working with her and her story a little bit because um, although I know personally your effectiveness, I think it gives kind of credence to your training methods that you've worked with somebody at
Mhm.
such a high level.
Mhm.
Um, so I kind of, I guess, tell us a little bit about how you met Shawn, kind of her story, and kind of how that developed.
Well, I met Shawn, and for those who don't know, Shawn is a female athlete. It's a female Shawn. Um, So I was at a clinic in Colorado Springs, and there was a gentleman also attending the clinic. I knew he was from this area originally, but now he lives out in Colorado, and he works for USA Cycling. And I attended the clinic with him, and then about a month after the clinic, he called me and said that he ran the para athlete team for USA Cycling, and he called me up and he said, "We have an athlete who's pretty close to you, who we think has talent, and would you be interested in meeting her, talking to her about her cycling, reviewing what she's done thus far?" And I was like, yeah, I mean, I would definitely be interested. And so that's how I first met her. So I went to my I went to my very first meeting with her. We sat down at a Panera, and I met with Shawn for about probably a little under an hour, not super long.
Hmm.
And in that hour, Shawn never even looked at me like in the eyes. Like there was no eye contact for an hour. And there was a lady who did some coaching with me. She was with me at the meeting. She came
Hmm.
along, and after the meeting, she said to me, "How are you going to coach her? She won't even look at you." And I was like, "I don't know, but I'm super intrigued." And I remember the meeting. All Shawn would really say is the only thing, the only thing I could get out of her was, and you have to remember this is a para athlete. I know we'll talk about the para aspect.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
only thing she really ever said is, "I really love to ride my bike. I don't really know what I'm doing." Basically, is what she said that whole hour. So, it started there, and when I met her, she weighed like she was a big athlete. She was probably 200 pounds,
Hmm.
about my height, about 5'8", 5'9". She was big. I mean, she was did not have the body of an elite cyclist, I can assure you. But that's how I met her originally. Is just I had that connection, so we sat down and met, and that was 2011 because it was 5 years before she was in the Rio Paralympics.
Hmm.
So that's how I met her. That's how we got started.
And you have to correct me, but um, Shawn was in the army or what?
Yeah, she
Okay.
was in the military, and she was in Afghanistan, and she was in multiple explosions.
Hmm.
And the last one, um, she showed me pictures of the Humvee some years later, and basically as a result, came away with a traumatic brain injury.
Hmm.
She had a traumatic brain injury, and part of the insides of her shoulder basically are like gone.
Hmm.
And she has um, she has problems with a lot of like leg spasms, and things like that. So she's not an amputee. Like a lot of times when we think about para athletes, we think about amputees and stuff. And
Right.
because sometimes people would say to me, they'd see like a picture of Shawn and they're like, "Oh, well, she looks, like sort of like a normal person." And I say,
Right.
"Well, would you rather have half a brain or half a leg?" I mean,
Yeah.
what would you like? I mean, so her injury was very serious, and she has some partial blindness in her left eye, as well.
So how does that, and this is just something I know a little bit about, but not a lot. So like, how do the different classifications work with the Paralympics? Because clearly, so say you have, a double amputee, like I would think, that's going to be a different classification on the track than, somebody like Shawn who still has, both of her legs.
So they have 5 classifications for para athletes.
Hmm.
And basically, those classifications, the athletes have to go to doctors to get classified, and the doctors and the specialists they set what level of classification you are. So Shawn's level is 4. She was a 3 when I met her, and then she moved to a 4. And a 5 is the least amount of the disability, and it
Hmm.
goes down. And so she was a 4, so she was next to the least level, least the most amount, least disabled athlete.
Right. Right.
So she was next level down for her. So yeah, it's 5 levels. They're established by doctors based upon an examination, basically of the athlete.
Okay. I
And
think
that's those are cycling classifications. USA Triathlon does it different.
right. Right. Um, so I was kind of curious a little bit about kind of the lead up to Rio for her and the training that you guys are doing. I think you had mentioned she does a 3,000. Is that her track event?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So in Rio, and one of the things about her is, yeah, it was the 3,000, and then the time trial out on the road. And
Okay.
so, you know, 5 years before the Olympics when I met her, we didn't really know at the time, what she would be doing cycling wise. We
Right.
had no idea she would be a track cyclist. I mean, that was not even thought of at that time. Um, so yeah, she did that. She did those were her 2 events. In the 5 years leading up, she had a lot of ups and downs, like really significant ups and downs. Um, but I was I was so proud of the way I would say in that crucial period from just right up to basically where you're traveling to Rio. to
Hmm.
about 8 weeks out. I mean, what I remember most about the training is how she just freaking nailed it. I mean, her training, she she was, like I said, she's in this area, Jesse, but she actually early that, I think it was around May or June of that year, she had to move. Her
Hmm.
husband's military, and he got relocated to Colorado Springs, so she actually had to move to Colorado Springs.
Okay.
So she was in Colorado Springs. So we continued to work, remotely, and like I said, from that crucial period, she just nailed her training. The training was phenomenal. The power numbers were right where we wanted them to be, right where we felt like, okay, with an event like the 3,000 and the road time trial, those are events where you can really dial in, okay, the numbers.
Hmm.
So you can be very high on the technology, and we knew where we had to be. She did a lot of training in the altitude rooms in Colorado, so she was training at sea level type
Right.
numbers, and so that's the biggest thing. I mean, she was really dialed in. But I got to tell you, we'll call them able-bodied athletes, which is like the regular Olympics. Okay, so we know that
Right.
those athletes are like really popular people. They get a
Hmm.
lot of media requests. They have sponsors they have to satisfy and things like that. What
Hmm.
people don't realize is that with para athletes, the media and the sponsors, they love the para athletes, because behind every para athlete is usually a tremendous story.
Right.
The able-bodied athletes, let's face it, most of those Olympians are born with it. I mean, they're genetically blessed. To where the para athletes, I mean, it's all work. And
Yeah.
so she also had tons of media requests and sponsors. She was nominated for an ESPY award, which is the
Hmm.
ESPN awards, and the ESPY award show was like, you're rubbing shoulders with like LeBron James and Peyton Manning, and it
Right.
was like 6 weeks before the Olympics, and we had decided at about 12 weeks out, we're like, done. We're
Hmm.
focused on training. There's no travel. There's no multiple day sponsor this and that. No. And she's like, yeah, I mean, we got to do this. So she didn't even go to the ESPYS that she was
Hmm.
nominated for.
Yeah.
Um, so because like I said, those athletes, there's always just a phenomenal story behind all of them,
Hmm.
and everyone wants to hear that story and everything. So, but she was able to put all that aside. We got down to business. I was so happy for her, because it's what she expressed that she wanted, 4 years previous,
Right.
But we weren't training for the Olympics 3 years out. We were just progressing. I mean,
Right. Right.
we were just progressing. But we were progressing through ups and downs and trials and tribulations and health. And, you come back from military, obviously there's a lot of PTSD situations.
Hmm.
Um, so there was lots of downs and lots of ups, but she was like, hopefully, like we like our stock market. It was like, up and down, but at the
Slightly
end,
progressing upwards.
and like I told you, when I met her, she weighed at least 200 pounds. She was racing in Rio 125
Hmm.
or so. Most of that weight came off in her first year, though. She
Yeah.
she lost a lot of weight in that first year, and then just kind of held on to it and just maintained after that.
See, one of the things I think you haven't highlighted yet, which is, this is what sticks in people's minds, and I do want that, anybody listening to kind of think about the progression. It's a 5-year progression for
Mhm.
Shawn to take, from starting to work with you all the way to Rio. But if I remember correctly, Shawn won her event. She was a gold medalist in her event, and
In both,
she broke her own world record in the event. Was that correct?
yeah, and that's on the track.
Right, right,
She is the she um and I think she still is the world for in her classification, has that
right.
record on the track, yeah. And she is um I'm not surprised that she was good at the track, because I think she's very well built for it. She likes the time trial aspect. She likes just putting her head down and going. And I really think, especially in that crucial time period, I think I could have put anything together in a workout. I think she would have nailed anything that I would have put together for her. There's
Hmm.
not much doubt in my mind about that. But come to find out later, like we were talking about genetics and stuff, that time trial, and now she loves the track.
Hmm.
just put your head down and go. And there's
Yeah.
not a lot of thinking involved. It's just, put your head down and go type thing.
Right. Right. Um, I got one last question before we go. Um, if you could only eat one thing for recovery for the rest of your life, what do you choose?
Okay, so one thing for recovery. So we're talking about like after a workout, or
Yeah, so you went to the track, or you just um, busted it on the bike. Whatever you did, you're exhausted. You've
okay,
been at it for an hour, a couple hours. You only get one thing you're gonna eat.
okay. Now, do you want a real food answer, or do you want something that's like a product? Doesn't
You can
matter.
give me either.
Okay, okay. So I guess full disclosure. So I do have a relationship with Hammer Nutrition, but I think Hammer Nutrition's Recover Right product is really hard to beat.
Hmm.
Um, for recovery. And the reason why I say that, it's got that, a lot of times when athletes think about recovery, it's, they think a lot about protein, but actually we want about a 3-to-1, 3 to 4 to 1 ratio of
Right.
carb to protein for perfect recovery, because we burn through a lot of carbohydrate with what we do. So you got to have that replaced as well quickly. So they've got that 3 or 4 to 1. I think it's about a 3-to-1 ratio. You're getting some electrolytes. It's a water-based product, so you're starting the rehydration process. There's no sugars added to the product. Um, but most importantly, I think in it is it contains a um, really good mixture of L-glutamine.
Hmm.
And what I would say is, we hear about, there's a magic formulas coming out all the time. I just saw one today, marshmallow root. I saw that.
Okay.
Marshmallow root's the next big thing. There's always the next big thing, but L-glutamine is, our muscles are like 60% made up of the amino acid of
Hmm.
L-glutamine.
Hmm.
And it's not just muscle recovery. There's cardiovascular, there's GI benefits. I think a product, I would encourage anyone, L-glutamine in your day-to-day life, even if you're not an athlete, all the benefits. But recovery as an athlete, L-glutamine has to be there, and that's in the product as well. Um, so I don't know. I think Hammer's Recover Right, and it tastes really good too. I think it's tough to beat. I think the quality of it is tough to beat.
All right. Well, we'll take that.
Yeah.
So if people want to get in touch with you, you have questions or want to bring you on as a coach, how do they get in touch with you?
They can email. My email address is ryan@coasttocoasttriathlon.com.
And I'll have that on the screen. You should probably be able to see that now if you're watching on YouTube. So thanks for coming on today, Coach.
Thanks, Jesse.